They gave her everything, and me, nothing. All those years of sacrifice, wasted. All the love, the effort, ignored. I wasn't their favorite. I was invisible, forgotten. She got it all, and I got nothing. From the very beginning, my parents had a favorite, and it wasn't me. My sister, the so-called golden child, was the one who received all the attention, all the praise, and all the love, or at least what felt like love. Every birthday, every achievement, every little accomplishment she had was celebrated as if she had done something extraordinary, while I quietly carried the weight of everything else in the family. I learned early on that my role was to support, to fix problems, to sacrifice without expecting recognition. While my sister got the newest toys, the best clothes, and the constant admiration of our parents, I worked silently in the background. I helped with her homework, stayed up late fixing things she forgot, took responsibility for chores and mistakes I didn't make, all without acknowledgement. My efforts were invisible, my successes ignored. Even small moments were telling. If she wanted something, it was given immediately. If she needed attention, they dropped everything to cater to her. Meanwhile, I learned to hide my feelings, to suppress my needs, because apparently I was strong enough to manage. "You're strong, you'll be fine," they would say, brushing off the pain I felt. I began to understand that my sacrifices were assumed, my love was expected, and my existence barely noticed. I remember countless nights staying up late to help my sister with school projects, while she slept peacefully, completely unaware of the work I was putting in. In the morning, she would receive all the praise, while I was given a simple, "Thanks, that's what you're supposed to do." No one celebrated my efforts. No one acknowledged the endless hours I spent trying to make things easier for her. And yet, I continued. I kept quiet. I did what was expected, because that's what a responsible child does, especially when they are invisible in their own home. Birthdays, holidays, even family vacations were never about me. Every memory, every photo, every story told in our house revolved around her. She was always at the center, glowing in the spotlight, while I became a shadow, quietly observing. Even my accomplishments were unnoticed, my successes swallowed by the constant narrative of her being exceptional. And it wasn't just material favoritism, it was emotional. My sister could cry, complain, misbehave, and my parents would rush to comfort her. I could do the same, and I would be told to be strong or handle it yourself. By the time I was a teenager, the pattern was clear. I was invisible in my own family. Every sacrifice, every effort, every sleepless night went unnoticed. I had given up my own happiness for the sake of maintaining peace in a household that loved only one child unconditionally. And yet, I stayed, because I believed that loyalty and patience would eventually be rewarded. Looking back now, I realize how deep the favoritism ran. It wasn't just about gifts or attention, it was about value. My parents valued my sister's happiness over my existence. They praised her for things I had done behind the scenes. They celebrated her achievements and overlooked mine. And through it all, I remained quiet, strong, and unseen, storing all my hurt in silence, unaware that the betrayal would cut even deeper. This is the backstory of my life growing up in the shadow of my golden child sister. The years of invisible labor, unnoticed sacrifices, emotional neglect, and the painful realization that the love I craved was never mine to have. And it all set the stage for the moment that would change everything, the moment I would see in black and white just how much I had been overlooked and betrayed. The day of the will reading started like any other, quiet, tense, but nothing could have prepared me for what was coming. We sat in the lawyer's office, the air heavy with anticipation. My parents looked calm, almost proud, while my sister sat smiling, oblivious to the storm about to unfold. I tried to steady my breathing, hoping against hope that my years of sacrifice, my loyalty, my endless effort would be recognized, that maybe, just maybe, I would get what I deserved. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading. At first, it was the usual legal formalities, but then he paused and looked directly at me. My heart started racing. "To my son," he said, "we leave nothing." Time froze. The words echoed in my ears like a cruel joke. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The room seemed to tilt and all the air was sucked out. "Nothing?" I whispered to myself, my voice trembling. I looked at my sister, who beamed as if receiving a trophy she had worked for her entire life, completely unaware of the injustice I was feeling. My parents sat there, expressionless, as though they had already decided my fate long ago. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to ask them why, but the words got stuck in my throat. This wasn't just about money or material things. It was the recognition, the validation I had spent my entire life craving. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every act of loyalty, every invisible effort, it all meant nothing to them. They had favored her all along, and now the proof was in black and white. The lawyer continued. Every asset, every property, every little thing went to her. My sister clapped politely, unaware of the magnitude of the betrayal. I wanted to vanish. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. I remembered all the nights I had spent helping her, supporting her, sacrificing my happiness for her comfort, and now it was clear. It had all been taken for granted. My parents didn't just overlook me, they actively erased me from their legacy. A million thoughts ran through my head. How could they do this? How could they ignore everything I had done, everything I had given? The realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. I had never been loved the way my sister was. I was a tool, a shadow, a silent supporter, always expected to give but never receive. Tears welled up, but I refused to let them fall. Anger mixed with heartbreak, a burning combination that made me feel both small and powerful at once. This was the ultimate betrayal, not because I didn't get the inheritance, but because they showed me in the clearest way possible that all my love, effort, and loyalty had been meaningless to them. In that moment, I understood. This was the breaking point. I realized that I had been living my life for people who never truly saw me. And as my sister celebrated, unaware of the storm raging inside me, I made a silent vow. I would never let their favoritism or neglect define me again. This was betrayal in its rawest, most painful form, a lifetime of invisible effort rendered meaningless in one simple sentence: you get nothing. Sitting in that lawyer's office, staring at the words on the page, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just anger, and it wasn't just heartbreak. It was a sudden, cold clarity. For years, I had been giving my all, sacrificing my happiness, bending over backwards for my family, only to realize that they never truly saw me. My parents never valued me the way they valued my sister. Every act of love, every moment of effort, every ounce of my loyalty had been assumed, expected, and ultimately ignored. And now, in that single sentence, "you get nothing," they had shown me exactly where I stood in their eyes. The initial shock began to fade, replaced by a fierce understanding. I saw my childhood, my teenage years, and even my adulthood in a new light. I remembered the times I stayed up late helping my sister with her homework while she slept peacefully, taking credit for my work. I remembered the countless times I covered for her mistakes, smoothed over her misbehavior, and kept the household running while my parents showered her with praise. Every flash of favoritism, every moment I had been overlooked, every unacknowledged sacrifice, all of it led to this undeniable truth: I had been invisible. And with that realization came a surge of power. Not power over them, at least not yet, but power over myself, over my own life, my choices, my boundaries.
I understood that their love had been conditional, tied to their vision of what I should be, not who I actually was. I understood that their decisions were never about fairness or gratitude. They were about favoritism, and I had been trapped in the shadow of my sister for too long. In that moment, I made a silent vow. Enough was enough. I would no longer allow myself to be invisible. I would no longer be the one carrying the weight while others reaped the rewards. I realized that true power didn't come from fighting them or seeking revenge. It came from reclaiming control over my own life. I started small. I stopped bending to every demand, stopped prioritizing their needs over my own. I ignored calls when I knew they were guilt-tricking me. I said no to favors that drained me, no to obligations that went unappreciated. Each time I refused, I felt a little lighter, a little stronger. My parents and sister noticed, though they didn't fully understand it. The tension in their voices, the surprise in their eyes, it was a silent acknowledgement that I was no longer the person who would silently carry their burdens. The emotional shift was profound. I realized that my value didn't come from their recognition, and my happiness didn't depend on their approval. The years of neglect had forged a resilience within me that no favoritism could ever break. I felt anger, yes, but also a quiet pride. For the first time, I was acting for myself, making decisions that honored my worth rather than trying to earn theirs. And as I stood in that space between betrayal and freedom, I saw a new horizon. My parents and sister could have everything. They could hold the material world in their hands, but they could never take away my dignity, my self-respect, or the freedom I was claiming. I wasn't powerless anymore. I wasn't invisible anymore. I had finally stepped out of the shadow, and in that light, I felt unstoppable. This was the moment everything changed, the moment I stopped being a pawn in their favoritism and became the master of my own life. The moment I realized that while they gave her everything, I was walking away with something far more valuable: control, freedom, and the unwavering knowledge of my own worth.
After the betrayal and my realization, I thought the hardest part was over. I thought I could quietly step back and focus on my own life. But life has a way of testing you when you least expect it. Not long after the will reading, the first subtle signs appeared. A call in the middle of the night, a text asking for help, a reminder of some family responsibility I had always carried. It started small, almost casual, but I could feel the tension beneath every word. My sister, the golden child, the one who had everything handed to her, suddenly needed me, and my parents, who had ignored me for so long, were now sending their requests, their guilt-laden appeals, their expectations. At first, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to respond, to help, to do what I had always done. But then I remembered every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every invisible moment of my life that had been dismissed. I realized that this was their test, the final attempt to pull me back into the role they had always expected me to play, the role of the obedient, invisible child. When my sister came to me, expecting the usual support, I stood firm. Her eyes widened in shock, confusion mixing with a hint of fear. She had never seen this side of me, the side that refused to be manipulated, the side that refused to bend to her every whim. I calmly but firmly told her, "I'm done. I'm not your backup anymore. I'm done sacrificing myself for a life that doesn't value me." Then came my parents. They tried the guilt, the anger, the emotional pressure. But I had learned that my worth didn't depend on their approval. I had gained control, and I wielded it quietly but decisively. I said no to every demand, refused to be drawn into their manipulations, and walked away from the toxic cycle they had created. Each refusal was like reclaiming a piece of my life, a piece of myself that had been trapped in their shadow for so long. The room seemed to shift. Suddenly, the golden child, who had once been untouchable, looked uneasy. The parents, who had always held the power, felt the imbalance. I wasn't reacting with anger or revenge, I was simply acting from strength and clarity. My silence, my refusal, my unwavering stance became my weapon. And in that moment, I realized something profound. True power doesn't come from taking what's yours by force. It comes from refusing to give yourself away to those who don't see your value. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, just quiet, undeniable truth. I had walked into the storm, stared down years of neglect and favoritism, and emerged unshaken. They could beg, plead, or even attempt to guilt me, but I was done. The confrontation wasn't about proving them wrong, it was about proving myself right. I was no longer the invisible child. I was no longer a pawn. I was free. And as I left the room that day, the tension behind me, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for decades. This was the final confrontation, not with words, not with anger, but with boundaries, with strength, and with the unshakable knowledge of my own worth. I had finally taken control of my life, and nothing could take that away. Walking away from the confrontation, I felt a clarity I had never known before. The anger, the heartbreak, the betrayal, all of it still lingered, but it no longer had power over me. For the first time in my life, I realized that my happiness didn't depend on my parents' approval or my sister's recognition. I had been living in the shadows for decades, and now I was stepping into the light of my own freedom. I focused on myself, on the life I had been postponing while caring for a family that never truly valued me. I began making decisions based solely on what I wanted, what I needed, and what I deserved. No more invisible sacrifices, no more unacknowledged effort, no more bending to the expectations of those who never saw my worth. This was my life, and finally, I was in control. The realization hit me like a wave. While they gave her everything, money, possessions, status, they could never take away my self-respect, my dignity, or the strength I had gained through years of struggle. I was richer than they could ever understand, because my freedom and my peace were priceless. The golden child might have inherited the family fortune, but I had inherited something far more valuable: independence, clarity, and the power to shape my own destiny. Every step I took away from that household, away from the manipulation, favoritism, and emotional neglect, felt like a reclamation of my life. I no longer needed their approval or validation. I no longer needed to justify my worth. I had finally learned that love that is conditional isn't love, it's control, and I refused to let anyone control me again. Looking back, I realized something profound. The years of pain, the years of being overlooked, had made me stronger than I ever imagined. The betrayal, the favoritism, and the heartbreak weren't the end. They were the beginning of a life I would build for myself on my own terms. And with that power, I could finally breathe. I could finally live. They gave her everything, but I walked away with something far greater. I walked away with my freedom, my dignity, my strength. And in that, I found a peace that no inheritance could ever buy. This wasn't just an ending, it was the start of a life that was truly mine.